Happy 2025, y'all, and welcome to First Dates and Soulmates. I am your host, Nikki McKnight.
And I am Meg Casebold. Hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and today we are excited to bring to you what undoubtedly will become the highlight of the awards season. We are competing with the Oscars. We are so pleased to present the first annual Tingly Awards. So for those longtime listeners, you may be aware of a bit of a running joke we have on this show. And it is these books that give us tingles in our groiny bits. And as we were discussing, you know, what are we going to talk about in January? What episodes we're going to do? I brought up the concept of Maintenance Phase, another podcast that I love. They do a wrap-up show on their Patreon called The Grifties, where they kind of look at like all the health and wellness grifters from the year. And I was like, Meg, that might be kind of fun to like wrap up and kind of talk about some stuff we have going on in the new year. And she goes, wait, what if we called it the Tinglies? And I was like, done.
There it is. Yeah, I was thinking about the Dundies on The Office too, where they all go to Chili's and Pam gets really drunk and she gets like whitest sneakers.
I have never seen an episode of The Office.
How?
In my life. I tried. It's one of those shows I tried to watch a couple episodes and I was like, this is too cringe for me. I can't do it.
Yeah, it definitely has cringier episodes and it starts cringier, but we don't need to go into The Office.
We don't need to go to The Office. But we have the Tingly Awards today. We're going to be talking about some of our favorites, tropes and books and authors and series, kind of talking about some of our favorites for the year. And we're also going to be talking about a fun little activity that we're going to do as a collective this upcoming year.
For all of 2025, we have a bit of a reading challenge for you and for us.
Also very true. So Meg, before we kind of jump into our tingly category, I'm going to laugh every time I talk about
every time you say it.
And I love it very much. So before we dive into those and we dive into our reading challenge for this new year, what were your general thoughts on your reading habits, your writing? You had a big year. You had a book come out, big things. But what is your, overall top level reflection on the year that was 2024?
In terms of reading, I think I'm about average, like volume wise. I'm going to end the year. We're recording a couple weeks before the end of the year, and I'll probably end about where I usually do, which is about 220 to 240 books this year. Oh, I went down a couple rabbit holes, like a couple series where I just binged an entire author, and it felt new to me in a weird way. But then I went back and looked at my Goodreads for 2023 and 2022, and I'm like, no, I always do that. So it's not really any new behavior here. But I do find that I tend to dive into the rabbit holes of the tropes that I'm writing. So this past year, I read more Black Cat books, or I read more By Awakening books, or I read more of, what do I need the trope to do for me? I read more of those. So that's part of my sort of reading pattern is seeking out the types of books that I want to write to understand reader expectations. What about you?
I like it. I was like, it just reminds me of that scene in Schitt's Creek where you're like, write it off. You can write it off. All that research, it's a tax write-off because it's research for work. In terms of volume, I was like, as of today, again, we're about halfway through December at the time of this recording. We're pretending the future. I think I'm at about 682 for the year. And I go on holidays end of next week, like mid next week. I am on my like 2.5 weeks off that I give myself every December, January. From my job.
That'll be another 100 books in about 10 days for you.
You should see like the TBR list of like how I keep myself organized is like, I don't really have like a TBR list per se, but like all the authors I like to read, all the series I'm reading, like I'm subscribed to them on Amazon. I'm on those authors' email newsletter. So when they get a notification of like new release or upcoming release, I have a folder in my email that I just put all of those into so that when I finish the ones that are on my Kindle app, I just go to the book folder and I'm like, great, what's the next ones? And then I go download those and I read those. So just looking at that book email folder, there's probably about 50 books in there right now. So I have a feeling I'm going to cross 700. I know I will. My goal for the year was 900, I think, because last year I did 1,000. 200 of those were novellas. So obviously a little bit more volume, but I think I'll probably end up about 715, 720 this year.
Any big patterns or trends that you noticed?
Ooh, I do have a tingly category related to my reading habits on my top genres this year. Now, this was done manually because I just used my Kindle Insights to track my reading, but I remember all these books that I read. So it's not like I used anything like official, like a Spotify Wrapped type of deal. My top read genres of this year, or tropes, as it were. Meg, what do you think some of them were? I have four top ones.
4 top ones. I would say queer.
Oh, they're all queer. Let's just put that out there. That's not even a category for me. That is 99% of what I read. That's a given for me. After that.
That's why it's the one I started with. And I would say specifically MM within the queer space.
Yeah.
I would say paranormal / fantasy. A little bit more of the paranormal than high fantasy for you, where you have a lot of dragons and dragons.
Ooh, you are correct. One of my top genres was paranormal crime fighting. So specifically, paranormal books that have like a crime fighting element, or where they're fighting against demons, they're fighting against the bad guy, or they're like procedurals. So yes, paranormal crime fighting was one of my top genres.
That is so specific. I don't know if I'm going to get the rest given. I would say like a Bioawakening might be a category with you.
Ooh, I didn't have that on there, but that's probably like just outside of my top ones.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I would
say that's top 10, but not top 5.
There you go.
All right. What else? I can't think of anything.
So, age gap was a big one for me this year.
Interesting. We have never talked about your age gap, and I would not have expected it from you because of the student-teacher dynamic that you dislike.
It definitely is, so for my age gap stuff, I think pretty much all of, again, I hate student-teacher. I'm like, I don't like anything that's like, I'm like 19. I'm like,
but hold on,
how
much of the age gap is like different species age gap, where it's like a 2,000-year-old demon and a 20-year-old human? Is that age gap still?
No. So most of my age gap stuff was contemporary, but the difference was, I think the youngest was maybe like 24 to somebody in their 40s. But for the most part, it was like 30s to 50s and 60s. So there was actually a lot of age gap that like skewed like slightly older love, which when I looked back on it, I'm like, oh, I actually kind of like this. I like late in life love stories. I think was kind of part of that age gap thing that really showed up for me this year. So
we might have to do an episode. I had no idea this was one of your tropes. That's fascinating.
It's surprising. I think it's because I kind of like, and this is another one of my categories later, like I kind of like a daddy type relationship. Like I really like the caretaker aspect of those relationships. So I think those inherently typically have age gaps. So that's where that came up. All right, I got 2 more. So the other one that showed up a lot for me was what I am calling blank to lovers. And I was pretty evenly split between like enemies and friends to lovers. There was a lot of like transition. So you talked about Bioawakening, that really showed up in like the friends to lovers aspect of that, but a lot of like enemies to lovers too, which again, I like it because it's usually like a lot of nice tension and then a release of that tension. It's delightful. And then the last top genre for me is what I'm calling protection. I'll save you. So a lot of like, not necessarily just caretaking, but also like literally saving people from danger or saving people from a bad situation. Like maybe they've been kicked out, maybe they're down on their luck with their money, or maybe they're under attack from some sort of paranormal creature. And that kind of goes into my paranormal crime fighting genre. So
and there's like a bodyguard protection.
Exactly.
You know, but as you're the bodyguard, you also are living in the house, and therefore you're making meals for that person. And there's, okay.
Yeah. No. So those were my top genres of the year. A couple surprises for me, honestly, but not too bad.
No, not too bad at all. Okay. So why don't we just leap right into our awards ceremony? I could like throw some ridiculous music in here where it's like, in a world where politicians are driving us a little bit nuts, where do we escape to get our happily ever afters?
I like it. All right. Do you want to hit us with one of your categories?
I would love to. My first category, and I went with a little bit tropier options, is the best space odyssey.
Ooh.
And so caveat, this is the best space odyssey I read this year in 2024. That does not mean that the book was published in 2024, and it also doesn't mean that it was the best space odyssey book I've ever read, but if we're going to do first annual, then we need to think about it. Okay.
I like it. I love it. Okay. Hit me with the best space odyssey. I love this as a category.
All right. So my runners up were, Andrea Jones, who was one of our first guests, turned me on to the Ruby Dixon Risdaverse series, which I am pulling the whole series as my list because they're all just formulaic but sweet. It's a lot of marriage of convenience. Many of them are human women who are resettled on a planet, and they are weaker than the aliens on said planet. And then each of them sort of finds a different way to fall in love with their partner. And the formula of it is lovely, but also, it's 22 books that are all primarily the same, and there's a comfort in that you can just like drop into any of them in the series and be comfortable with it.
Ooh, I like that.
Another one that I really loved as a space odyssey was Good Deeds by Kathryn Moon. I had read everything else that Kathryn Moon had written several years ago, but this one had sort of like fell off my radar. And so this is a woman who goes to basically like a sex planet for work reasons, and then she goes into heat, and she's never been in heat before, and so she has to like find robots to satisfy her.
I don't know this series at all, so this is
it's just one book. It's very quick. It's like 200 pages. Okay. And so she goes to like basically a robot brothel because she's like, well, I can't fall in love with the robots, and then obviously she falls in love with the robots, right?
Oh my god, I love it! I just love this concept of like a robot brothel. I'm very here for this.
And then the winner in the category, I think it's not going to be a surprise to anybody who's listened to this, is Earth Boys Are Easy by Seaborn.
I knew it was coming. Because I have that book in a category too. My category that involved that book, spoiler for who's in this category, I called it Books That Made Me Blush.
Oh, that takes work for you.
It does. So these are books that were either like, and it could have made me blush in a couple different ways, like kind of awkward and embarrassing to read. It could be that the dirty talk was real good. So one of them obviously is Micah and Ziggy from Earth Boys Are Easy.
Was it the amount of times they had sex while one of them was asleep? Is that what made you blush?
Was it the skin suits? It's all the skin suits.
It's the skin suits
offer multiple opportunities. So Micah and Ziggy definitely showed up in this category for books that made us blush.
I think every C. Rochelle book makes me blush a little bit.
I'm really excited, like slight sidebar, for the Christmas special book that she's releasing at the time of this recording, like soon. And it's going to have some of her holiday ones that she's already written, like for the Patreon, that are now going to be available to the public. But it's also got some new ones with Bai and Kai, and also the new one, which is Eric, the German DJ,
and the father figure,
the other space daddy. Oh my god, his name is totally escaping me right now. But that's going to be in this book too. So other books that made me blush. Meg, what book made me feel the most awkward this year that we covered?
Back to Seconds.
Back for Seconds is also on my list, and I'm going to say, maybe not blushing in a good way, but very awkward to read. So for those of you who haven't listened to it, this is our Thanksgiving gangbang novella episode from a couple weeks ago. Where vegetables become sentient humans, and they're on the dining room table, not the kitchen table, because these are classy broads. So that is on my list. I mentioned this actually as a ship a couple weeks ago. It was Winnie Takes Paris by Lane Hayes, the professor character of Alistair. He is one of those like absent-minded professor in the streets, but like dirty talking daddy in the sheets. And then I will say the last entrance into this category, it's a straight romance. Who knew I read a straight romance this year? I actually read
the 1%.
Yeah. Any idea whose dirty talking made it onto my list?
Oh, it's Cade. It's Cade from Heartless.
From Heartless by
he is a
those
great
hot scenes. We talked a lot about those in our episode on Heartless. So Cade also made it onto my list of books that made me blush this year. Really, really liked it. And sometimes things like dirty talk or overly descriptive books don't always like register for me just because of how my brain works and how it relates to words. But I gotta say, these ones, good job, authors. I had a good time, and sometimes not in the case of Back for Seconds, but it was entertaining time.
It was entertaining. It was good fodder for the podcast.
I will say. So yes, there we go. My books that made us blush category. Very delightful. Very delightful. Meg, what would you care to present our next Tingly Award?
Our next Tingly Award goes to the least annoying kid character.
Oh, this is a fantastic category.
So
we don't like kids in books.
I've said before, sometimes I'll stumble into a single parent romance for a specific reason that I'm looking to read it, but I don't seek out single parent romances. Because as a parent, often I struggle with like, I don't want to read about kids in my escapism. But there have been specific moments where I'm like, okay, this is actually the right move, right? Like this is the right book for me to read. So I have 4 books in this category, and I'll go through them and then I'll share the winner. So the first one is Next of Kin by Hannah Bonam-Young. I read it, and the next one that I'm going to recommend for the foster parenting element that plays into Peppermint Bark. I actually didn't want to write a kid into that book, but that's what Grace needed. You know what I mean? So I wanted to try to figure out how to make it work. So in Next of Kin by Hannah Bonam-Young, one character is fostering his younger brother, the other is fostering her younger sister. And one of them has a good job, but not stable housing. The other one has stable housing, but not consistent income. So the foster agency sets them up so that way they can sort of work on it together and both be able to pass the foster application. And then obviously they fall in love. But one of them is a baby and one of them is a deaf teenager. And, you know, so there's a lot of really beautiful experiences that happen as this sort of found family comes together.
Oh, cute.
So I loved that book.
Yeah.
And the next one is Family Camp by Eli Easton. It's another foster parent romance where it is a gay parent who has just agreed to foster 2 kids through the system. And so they go away to family camp so that way they can have a bonding experience. And so he's trying to get to know his kids. It's a family-run family camp. And one of the counselors is the foster son to the people who run the camp. And so they have this really beautiful conversation about what it means to be fostered and to be loved and be part of a family. And those kids are learning to trust again. And part of what they fall in love with each other, the adults, is the way that the kids are starting to trust both of them.
Ooh, that sounds really sweet. Okay, I think I could read that.
Yeah,
I'm like you. I don't necessarily like children in my romance books, but those sound really cute. Okay,
you know, I don't like bratty children, is what I think I'm realizing. I don't like a nanny where they have to come in and Mary Poppins it, but like if there's a reason that the kid is going to move forward the plot, and even if the kid has some emotional struggles, like that's a moment of being able to come together. Another one that I loved outside of the foster space, but I just read everything that Tal Bauer wrote because you told me about him. Is it's You and Me, which is 2 parents of high school aged football players. And so they get to know each other through the booster club. There's a bi-awakening. One of the kids is struggling. And so they sort of like their third act conflict is helping that child to confront some of the struggles that he has. So that sort of brings them together is the child, the teenage son, which I really loved. And then my favorite, least annoying kid character is my friend Norah Prichard wrote a book called The Other Side of Forever. She is divorced, and then the other one is a widower. And so you have these 3 kids who are all the same age, and it's just like a sweet little small town. They're playing on the same baseball team. One of the kids is diabetic, and one of the parents is a nurse. And so you sort of get this intermixing Brady Bunch style family. But the kids become friends before anything else happens, which is a really beautiful moment. So those are my least annoying children in romance novels.
Those. Okay. I am going to go into my next category. I like to imagine that if I were presenting at an award show like this, I would kind of be like the Helen Mirren type.
Ooh.
Very like elegant and beautiful, but when she opens her mouth, she is a sassy, funny lady, and I really, really love Helen Mirren. So that's the vibe I would channel if this was a real award show. So I'm kind of piggybacking off of my favorite genres, talking about enemies to lovers. I read some really great ones this year. So I have my top 3 in the enemies to lovers genre.
You were able to narrow it down to 3 enemies to lovers.
This was really hard. So I was like, originally I had like, here's my top 8. And I was like, no, that's dumb. So I was like, okay, we're going to get to 3 and just let that be enough. Let that be enough. So in my top 3, I have Dear Plant Daddy by
Oh!
So Meg interviewed Shanae on the show this year. I unfortunately could not make that episode, but Dear Plant Daddy is fun. I also just read the next book in the Love in Long Island series. It's like a
The Christmas Beard.
Christmas Beard. I literally read it this morning. So Shanae was very much on top of mine for me. But Dear Plant Daddy, we love it. You got the plant influencer at the new shiny plant store, and then you have like the I've been here forever plant owner, like fighting back against gentrification and the Instagramification. Fabulous, fabulous story. Also, it's called Dear Plant Daddy. And I believe I said this back when we originally were talking about Shanae's book. I'm like, that needs to just be a merch line. Like Dear
Yes.
Plant Daddy.
Dear Plant Daddy. Or just the Plant Daddies.
Also true.
Yeah,
also
you
true.
love a daddy.
I do.
There actually wasn't a lot of daddy in Dear Plant Daddy.
No, it was more subtle in that sense, which I really enjoyed. So the other one in my best enemies to lovers category this year, it was actually, I think it was a ship for me a couple weeks ago. It's Knockin' Boats by DJ Jameson.
Yes.
It's the Shallow Cove series, the one with like the food boat. Instead of a food truck, it's a food boat. Loved it. Lots of witty repartee. It was one where they were friends when they were younger, and then there was like a misunderstanding that they separated. And when they both came back to town, it was like tensions were high, but lots of sexy times on the water. But don't do it in the food boat. We said this in our food episode. Stay away from prep areas with your dangly bits. No. Just no.
Can we not talk about dangly bits in the Tingly Awards?
I just feel like it's very on brand for us. And then the last one I would mention in this category is As the Raven Flies by Megan Maslow. It's another entry into her Charm City Chronicles book. I love the first one, Demons in the Details, I think is the name of it. And I've read it probably 15 times.
Oh, wow.
This is the second one. So it takes place in Baltimore. And there are like different types of shifters that are very like, everybody has their territories, and Baltimore is this very like contentious city. And As the Raven Flies has kind of like the second in command of the Roost from the Raven who led the first book. And it turns out his fated mate is a bit of an asshole. He's like this cat type shifter. And they're very much like, no, we don't want each other because you suck. We love tension, and I love the Charm City Chronicles. It's just like a fun story with really interesting forms of government, and bureaucracy in this series. And I love a book that has like some type of bureaucratic government system in it that we have to navigate.
I almost had a category. I ended up vetoing it. That was best jobs that I didn't think I gave a shit about.
Actually, we might have to come back to that because I might have a similar category that we can discuss.
Let's just roll into your category then, because I didn't feel like I had enough to build up into it. But I'd love to hear your category for best jobs or best bureaucracy or best color-coded systems.
So here's where that came up for me, and I love that you mentioned that. So I was also trying to kind of just, review the show because, we're over 30-something episodes now. Go us. Woo. And I was trying to think, like, if we look back at our lore, the lore of this show that created the name of this award, I was trying to think of like, what are our top like catchphrases or recurring stories and themes on this show? So one is tingles in the groiny bits. Hello, obviously. Welcome to the Tingly Awards. That was one. The other one was every story about how you met your husband that just ends with me going, what?
Or like whirlwind holiday. Long distance. Yeah.
Exactly. So Meg's husband is a finalist in this category for me.
And he also listens to the show, so he's going to hear you say that and be like, oh my God, are you kidding, Meg?
Welcome. You have a show. The other one is bureaucracy and forms of government. It came up a lot in like the Bride episode. We talked about Allie Hazelwood's Bride. It's come up every so often.
The Louise Masters episode where we read those
exactly.
books.
The Hidden Species series. And then, of course, Justice for Operations Professionals. And my love of color-coded spreadsheets and people who work in the operations field to keep things organized. So those were, adding to the First Dates and Soulmates lore was that category.
All right, so I'm going to move on to my next category, which is one of my favorite tropes that I just am always, always, always reading, which is Second Chance.
Ooh.
I love A Second Chance. It was really hard for me to narrow this down. Okay, I'll go through them quickly. Replay by Amy Daws is in their football series, but Americans say soccer, but it's British football. I read the whole series, but I went back and reread Replay. They were together and then they broke up and then she got pregnant and moved away and he wasn't sure if it was his or not. And so there's a lot of tension around that. She lost the baby. She went home to go to rehab and then came back like when her brother had a baby, which was a previous series. So they sort of had that chance to reconnect, but there was a lot of miscommunication at the time about why she was leaving.
Ooh.
Another one of my favorites is A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This is a little bit
great title.
It's a fantastic title. This is, I don't know if it would actually technically be considered second chance, but I think so. It's also sort of a friends to lovers mistaken identity. It is a glorious book. It is written after the Battle of Waterloo. So it has a trans character in a historical, which is hard to do. Before this character transitioned, she was best friends with the other character. They went off to war and she faked her death to restart her life as a woman. And then she ended up moving in for romance reasons back in with her former best friend.
Mm-hmm. And so this is intriguing.
It's so good. And so, she had to give up her title. She had to give up all of her wealth. It had to go to a cousin, but it was worth it for her to make this transition. And then when she goes and meets with her former best friend, he's distraught because he lost his best friend and he feels like it's his fault, but actually she faked her own death. And then he kisses her and she's like, but you don't know that I'm me, that I'm him, and it's such a glorious mistaken identity. And also this, what does it mean to be who you are and what are we willing to sacrifice for that? Excellent book.
Oh, okay. That's definitely going on my TBR. Because sometimes, I find that kind of scenario in like a historical, like when you have like trans character. Obviously, trans people have existed since the beginning of time in different forms. So sometimes I get really nervous when I read those in historicals because even the current climate is not great for trans folks. So to put it back in a historical makes me sometimes really anxious to read because you're like, I just want you to have everything you want. But if you say it's good.
And I trust Alexis Hall to do it well.
Perfect. All right. It's going on my list. I love it.
Okay. And then two more second chancers are Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I threw this into this category at the last minute because I was trying to build an anti-billionaire category and I couldn't. Like an anti-capitalist, I'm still a little bit shocked that this book was released by a major publishing house when it is so anti-capitalist. But we'll throw it into the second chance because it's one of my favorite books that I read this year. He is the child of a billionaire family. They expected him to take over their grocery store business. He had a big fight with his dad and ended up leaving to go off to get his MBA or something, or to study. He's going to get his PhD, but because he left his family, he walked away from his trust fund. And so in order to get student housing, he has to get married. And there's a girl who also is financially unstable. And so they get married so that way they can live in the grad school housing together. And for the 4 years that he's in college, they basically just are roommates, but pretty much don't spend any time together. And then his younger sister gets married and his family's like, you have to bring your wife. We haven't met her yet. So he goes to find her and she's like a convenience store clerk. She's really struggling financially. And now he's aged into his trust fund so he can offer her financial incentive to come on this vacation with his family, pretend that they're in love, but they're already married.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like this would make such a good movie.
It is. And Christina Lauren does a great job of building the tension throughout this and really hitting those beats really well. So, and then they go to this deserted island in Fiji, not deserted, but luxury island in Fiji or Bali, might be in Indonesia, very exclusive. And both of them are just disgusted by the amount of wealth that's happening around them. Because it's the family is trying to show off. So loved that one. And then the last one in terms of second chance that I loved is The Vows by Jessica Joyce. This is a couple who were friends first, and they have a mutual best friend. So it was like the three of them were best friends when they were in high school. When they got to college, Georgia and Eli got together. They moved to New York City together. And then he became such a workaholic that Georgia was like, I can't live with you. I can't stay. Moved back to San Francisco. Now that mutual friend is getting married, and they are the co-best people in his wedding. And so they have to spend this week together at this glorious Napa vineyard as things are like falling apart and they're trying to fix them. You know, like the original venue burns down and the cake has a problem. And so they're like fixing this wedding, but at the same time, they're coming back together. And Eli's able to sort of apologize for the way that he treated her. And so it's a really, really beautiful second chance romance.
Oh, these all sound delightful. Maybe I'm just going to have to get to like 730 books.
Am I going to make you read more MFs this year?
I feel like it's a challenge. Okay, so here's just random sidebar about this. Like, I used to read so much fan fiction. And one of the reasons I got turned off of fan fiction is because it became so like proliferate, I guess. Like anybody could do it.
Yeah.
It made it really hard to find good ones. So I would pretty much stop reading unless somebody gave me a very specific recommendation. I feel like this is my thing with MF. I will read it, but I am not willing to do the legwork to find the good ones. So
yeah, that's fair.
Perhaps this is how it's going to
You're only going to read my recommendations for MF.
Pretty much.
This is like a big responsibility for me as far
Yes, thank you. Please accept this charge. The only MF books I read this year were ones that we read for this show that you were like, this is so good, we have to read it. And I was like, amazing.
I feel like I read more MM this year because every time I was like, Nikki, I want to find a book that does this. You're like, great, here's 10.
Thank you for asking. Here's like 6 series. This one's in progress. This one's done. Here's standalone.
All right, so more Rex.
Okay, so I'm going to go into my next category, piggybacking off this idea of, oh my God, Nikki read MF this year. Who knew? My category is called Surprise Love. It's a book that was either new to me in terms of author, genre, trope, or in the case of an author I have read before, something new that they tried that is kind of outside my genre that I loved. So
love that.
So first one for me in Surprise Love was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I am shocked at how much I love that book. And not just because it was MF. You know, I like paranormal. It had a good bureaucratic government system. Clearly, I love this.
When we're checking off our favorite things, that's one of the
there you go. I feel like it just had a lot more depth.
On your bingo card, there's like a nice little bureaucracy.
Yes, I need a bureaucracy box. Thank you. But it had a lot of depth to it. It had a lot of like really robust world building and storytelling. So I thought I would enjoy it. I really liked it a lot more than I expected to. So big fan of that one. My next surprise love is the His Mate by Vengeance, which is book 1 in the Lunetti Pack series by Mel H's. This is a new author to me. I have now read book 2 in the series because that's all that's out now. So I kind of like Shifter and I kind of like Mafia, but there's a lot of those that I don't like particularly, that are not to my taste. Interesting government system. There are witches that own a motorcycle club. There's like outside witches. There's shifters who run certain parts of government. So it's a little bit darker than my normal taste. But again, the author still manages to infuse the characters with a lot of warmth, which I really enjoy when you have like this dark world, but like warm characters. I'm a fan. My next surprise love was If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy. I think this was a ship very early on in our show. And it's a reality show style, right? Like, it's kind of like a Bachelor type deal, but it's like Cinderella themed. Our main heroine is a fat woman who wants to be a shoe designer. And she only goes on this show because her stepsisters are also going on it. And her stepmom is like the showrunner. And she's like, hey, I had some people drop out. Do you want to be on the show? It could be good publicity for you. They have a very beautiful relationship. So as she's flying home to LA to film the show, she kind of has like a little meet cute with the man sitting next to her on the airplane. Turns out he's the prince for the show. And it's just kind of their relationship. Again, 1, it's MF. 2, it was reality TV.
Yeah, this doesn't seem like your love
at all. Which is
not
my vibe, but really enjoyed it. Really, really sweet. And then my last one for this category, we were just kind of talking about this with your last category, was Men from Echo Creek by N.R. Walker. Now, I really like N.R. Walker. Writes a lot of stuff set in Australia. Phenomenal writer. But this is a historical and it's cowboy. And those two things
I love this for you.
normally don't go together in my head because, again, it's historical. It's set in Australia. Queer stories that are historicals always make me nervous because it's like, are they going to get discovered? Are they going to get assaulted? Again, still not great to be a queer person in the world today, everywhere, but it always makes me really nervous. But this, like the specter of assault, the specter of abuse, the specter of like persecution wasn't really there. They were still kind of like conservative in some parts of their story. But it was just so beautiful. It was so heartfelt. And they got a well-deserved, very well-earned happy ending to their story. And it was a historical and a cowboy, which those two things should be like a no-go in my brain. But I loved it so much. It was a phenomenal book.
All right, so I will add a couple to this category
because surprise love.
Because this, like, when you said surprise love, I thought you were going to say that they fell in love in a surprising way, not that you surprised yourself by loving them as much as you did. So I'm going to add "Thank You for Listening" by Julia Whelan. I adored this book. Julia Whelan has been the audiobook narrator for so many big names in the romance space. So she's done the audible narrations for the Christina Lauren books, for the Emily Henry books. And then she wrote her own book about an audiobook narrator and her like duet co-host.
Oh.
And so there's a lot of epistolary going back and forth about, okay, there's a famous author, like let's think like Norah Roberts level famous author who has a book that comes out posthumously, and her only request in getting it out is that these two audiobook narrators do it together. So they email each other and then they meet in real life not knowing that they are the other secret audiobook narrator. They have this incredible one night stand. They go back to just emailing each other, but they sort of become friends. So it's got a little bit of this, like, you've got Maylee secret identity thing going. And then she's giving an award at like the Audies, which is like the audiobook award ceremony, and she gives it to him on behalf of his aunt, who is the author, and it's like so glorious. It's
oh my gosh, book. This sounds really fun. I love like behind the scenes, like industry type books. So like I love this idea that's like it's the narrators. It's like
the narrators, and this really beautiful exploration too of the value of work that can be mass produced, but like you still have the human voice, which is really important to me, obviously, as a podcaster. So I love that book. And then also, this is a really popular book this year. It may have won Best Romance in the Goodreads category, but there's a reason for it. Funny Story by Emily Henry.
Oh, I know Emily Henry, but I do not know this book.
Okay, Funny Story is the main character, God, now I'm like forgetting her name, but the main character is engaged to a man named Peter. Peter's best friend is named Petra, and Peter goes to his bachelor party and ends up being like, no, I'm sorry, we have to break up. I'm actually in love with Petra. And please move out by the end of the week. And then Petra's boyfriend shows up on her doorstep and is like, is Petra here? And the girl's like, no, but do you need a roommate? Because Petra's moving into Peter's house. And so Miles is the new boyfriend, or no, I'm sorry, the new roommate. And so they end up falling in love very slowly, but both of them start the book being in love with their exes. And so they sort of make this agreement to, they're in this town that Peter's hometown. She moved to Peter's hometown, and then he ended up bailing on her. So Miles is like, no, let me show you the town so you can fall in love with it. But the whole time she's thinking about moving back to Maryland. She's thinking about leaving, but she has this lease. So the deadline, the ticking time bomb clock is the lease is going to end. And then, she has to make a decision of, does she stay with Miles or does she move back to Maryland? But it's a great, great meet cute.
Oh my gosh, you have such like fantastic like entries into these categories. I can just see my TBR balloon.
I feel like because I read more popular contemporary too, people are going to know my books and my authors because I do read more of the bestsellers. So It's hard to say. It's like I want to put the bestsellers on the list because there's a reason that some of them are the bestsellers, but
Mm-hmm.
also I want to highlight the indie authors, and you tend to be more
Mm-hmm.
indie, and that's okay, right? But I think we can have a mix.
There you go. Amazing. All right. We're getting to the end of our tingly categories. So for me, this is where some of like my heavy hitters are coming out. Like this is my version of like best actor, best picture, best director, types of categories. So my next category is favorite new series.
Ooh.
So this was a hard one for me because one, I kind of said to myself, for it to qualify for this category, it has to have been released this year. Because there's a
Oof.
couple series that I love, but like book one came out in like November of 2023. And I was like, no, maybe I didn't read it till 24, but I'm like, nope, not going to qualify in this category. It has to have been released in 2024.
I love this.
This was so hard.
Okay. Because you read so much every time I need a series. I'm like, Nikki, where should I start? Like literally 2 days ago, I'm like, I need a new series, and you sent me 4 new series. That
You're welcome.
So I get it.
So these ones, I did rank these ones. So in 4th place for me for favorite new series is Ink Slingers by K.M. Newhold. So I love K.M. Newhold. This kind of connects to some of her other series. It connects to Four Bears Construction. It connects to the Big Bulls Mechanics series. So Ink Slingers is the next in that universe. It's about the guys who own the tattoo parlor. 2 books are out so far. And of course, they're phenomenal. It's K.M. Newhold. Of course she can write fantastic books. So that's my number 4. In 3rd place, this is a fantasy. It's the On the Wind series by Sam Burns and W.M. Fox. All 3 books came out this year, so the series is now completed. And the 3rd book just came out a couple weeks ago at the time of this recording. So it's set in like this far off land. There's different warring countries, and the more quote unquote human country is at war with the country near them, because they call them like the bird people, because they think they like worship birds and they have sex with birds. But then that country is also fighting against this other country. And basically in the first book, one of the characters is like in love with the prince of the kingdom, and the king is like, this can't happen. So he gets rid of that character by sending him almost as like a quote unquote diplomat to like what I'll call the bird kingdom. And of course, shenanigans ensue. There's culture shock. There's weird things happening. But there's also this thing that the bird people, quote unquote, they're actually shifters in a sense. And if they love someone and then have sex with them, they can transfer this virus that can kill non-bird people. Or in the case of obviously these happy ever after books, will give a bird to these people from the other kingdoms, like to the non-birds, so they can shift into birds. So there's a lot of like, again, government structure and politics happening. But it's just like, it's really heartfelt. Like I love books that have like almost an element of culture shock in them. And because you're trying to understand a culture at the same time, you're trying to understand an individual that will eventually become your love interest. You're trying to understand your role in the new country. And like, I've lived in 5 different countries. So I've kind of experienced that similar thing. So I always love books that explore that. So the On the Wind series was delightful. In my 2nd place, this was a brand new author to me this year. And it is the Wayward Sons series by Elle Eveland. So if you like Onley James and like the Necessary Evil series, like Vigilante Psychopaths Killing for Good, that is the Wayward Sons series. So it's about a family.
One click read. That's all you need to tell me. One click read.
There you go. So I think the first 3 books in the series are out. 3 or 4 books in the series are out this year. It's about a family. Their parents are like in the mob, and they're kind of like vigilante killers. And each of the sons in the family have like, this is going to sound really weird when I say this, they have a different mental illness.
Okay.
So, some of them are just like psychopath, sociopath, etc. The most recent book that just came out, he has dissociative identity disorder. So he has, what we would colloquially call multiple personalities.
Yeah.
So each of those personalities are involved in the relationship in that book in certain ways with that love interest in book 3. I think it's 3 or 4. Shep's book. But, and some of those relationships are romantic, some of them are sexual, some of them are just friendly. So it's a very layered book. It is a dark series. It is definitely, there's a lot of murder and gore and like vigilante justice. So again, if you're a fan of Onley James, definitely recommend Wayward Sons by Elle Eveland. They've also
literally just downloaded as soon as
there you go.
If you're a fan of Necessary Evil.
There you go. And they've also written like a couple other different series, which I also read this year. But Wayward Sons, I was just so impressed by, and I was so happy for. But my number one favorite new series that came out this year, Goliath of Wrestling by Lily Mayne.
It made it that high. You've sent me like sections of it. You've sent me excerpts, but I didn't know it was the top series of the year. Wow.
Yes, it's so good. So I love Lily Mayne. Like the Monstrous series is definitely a series I'm a huge fan of. So the Goliaths of Wrestling series came out this year. I think book 4 just released like a couple days ago at the time of this recording. And I haven't read it yet. But it's basically a supernatural WWE. And
it came out a couple days ago. You haven't read it yet. And my thought is like, well, why haven't you read it?
I was trying to finish the Christmas Fall series. So that's what I've been doing. But Goliaths of Wrestling, again, supernatural WWE. The first book was about kind of like the organizer of the entire, it was like the supernatural Vince McMahon, if you're a WWE fan, kind of about him and the human who finds out about them. The book that, not the one that just came out, but I think it was book 3. It has a character who can like remove his head, and he does sexual things with the head off by itself, and his body doing another thing. Okay. There's a lot going on. And then this one that
didn't fit under books that make you blush?
Actually, you know what? It probably should have if I had expanded that category a little bit. There was a lot of
here, so you didn't want
a lot of graphic things happening with a little bit of peeping Tom and people getting surprised by, I'm sorry, he's doing what to himself with his head? Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Very fun. But the one that just came out a couple days ago, it involves the Rolling Rimmer, which is like a roll. His shtick is he's on roller skates, and then High Lord Crossbody, who's an elf. And that the way it's been set up so far, again, I haven't read it yet, is it's like enemies to lovers. There's like this elf prince thinks he's above everybody else, and like he's just a little roller skating thing. I'm so excited, but it's ridiculous. It's fun. There's some great plot, great characters. The sex scenes are great because it's Lily Mayne. And if you like some like non-human appendages or non-human things, there you go. Lily Mayne remains the queen of the non-human appendages. And so those are my top 4 new series for this year.
I love this. I have 2 series to add. I don't know about the publication dates fitting within this year, but they were the ones that I read this year that were my top 2 series of the year. The first is that recommendation from you of Onley James's Necessary Evils, which is why I immediately lapsed to downloading the Wayward Sons. You're like, it reminds me of this. And I just finished that, but I'm about to start the spin-off series of Jericho's Kids, which is the one of the heroes from book 5. So, I love the grittiness of it, especially, we have been reading a lot of low angst, small town when we were doing Christmas Falls recently. And I'm like, no, now I need some murder. And I need there to be like a murder where one person is like covered in blood and the other is like nonchalantly eating a granola bar. That's what I really need.
I love that in Jericho's book. It's like, here, have a snack. There you go.
Yeah, like they're just so not grossed out by it. It's so normal for them. And then the other one I mentioned this much earlier in the year is the Deals with Demons series by Saskia Stark. It is one of the stronger high fantasy books that I've read. Everyone talks about A Court of Thorn and Roses. I'm sure we'll read that, do a buddy read on that at some point in the next year or two, because it's a monster. But I have a lot of issues with A Court of Thorn and Roses. And I almost feel like Deals with Demons by Saskia Stark, like, she had the same issues and was like, I'm going to write the resolution to it where what they should have done instead to make the tension work better. So I'm not saying it was a direct reaction to it, but after reading ACOTAR, I was like, no, this is what I wanted ACOTAR to be.
Okay. So let us go into our it's our best picture time. Everybody's a little bit drunk in the audience. They're like, we're ready for the after party. We're ready to go. So my final category, the final category of our first annual Tingly Awards is top book of the year. So, my top 5 books of the year in ranked order. In 5th place, Devil's Own, book 6 in the Palm Island series by K.M. Newhold. You have a sexy southern island, lots of shenanigans, and this one is a throuple with an established couple and a third. So good. Highly a fan.
Love that setup.
There you go. In 4th place, no surprise here that this author had to make an appearance on my end of year list, Rabble Endgame by C. Rochelle. Did she have a book with 13 POVs? Yes, she did. And it was fabulous. If you want more C. Rochelle, go listen to the episode where we interviewed her. She's phenomenal. In 3rd place, Soar, book 3 in the Wings and Wand series. This is a co-write between A.J. Sherwood and Jocelyn Drake. Dragons, mages, fated mates, but still in a contemporary universe. It's so good. And this one basically has a mage that says, I don't care if you're my fated dragon. I'm out, boy. See ya. And the dragon's like, what? So very, very fun. Lots of drama. In 2nd place, AJ Sherwood coming up again. John's Helter Skelter Cold Case. John's mystery series is one of my favorite series ever. This is the final book for John and Donovan. They finally get married. Lots of shenanigans. Oh my gosh. So good. And in my top spot, I talked about this book a couple weeks ago because it made me fucking cry, is Conflicted by Lark Taylor. It's the first book in the Angels series, spinoff from the Damned series and all those things. But Conflicted by Lark Taylor, my sweet little baby angel Micah. He's going through so much. I just want to hug him. Made me cry. Such a great story. 100% my top book that I read this year was that one. Meg, anything you would like to contribute?
I have a top 4, and I think we have talked about all of them either in this episode or in previous episodes. So the first is I also have a C. Rochelle on my list. Mine was Into the Multiverse, which I loved the completion of that series before going into sort of the epilogue of Rebel Endgame. And I just everything about those twins and their mind melding. I just adore them.
Such shenanigans.
Another is Scandalized by Christina Lauren. I talked about that on our Best Friend's Brother episode. That is a celebrity. His family moved away. And so they were, she was childhood friends with his sister. She knew him before. Now he's this massive Korean TV star, and then he went on the BBC, and now he's moved to LA, and they're trying to figure out if they can have a relationship together. I just talked about The Vows by Jessica Joyce, so I'm not going to bring that one up again, but I think I devoured that in about a day and just loved the gorgeous writing in it. And then my last top one of the year is Firefly by Emmy Saunders. This was one of my ships earlier this year. It is one of the heroes has selective mutism, and so he doesn't speak as clearly in full sentences as many people, and so people kind of make these assumptions about his intelligence. But his childhood best friend understands him, but doesn't think that he's gay, So there's a bi-awakening. There's just this kind of neuro acceptance, which is gorgeous. I think it's just a beautifully written book, but also as the parent of a child with a speech disorder, it's a lot of hope for me. That was my biggest tearjerker of the year, aside from writing my own book, which just brought up all the tears. Well, you know what the hell, we'll make it 5. Top book of the year is Peppermint Bark No Bite. I'm not afraid.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not afraid to I personally really like it. It made me cry all the time, but it's a lovely book. And as I'm working on book 2 now with the sequel to it, I'm like, yeah, I really like that book, so we'll throw it in there without trying to sound too self-promotional.
No, I love it. Promote away. We should all be selfish when it comes to promotion. I love it. So thank you, everyone, for attending our first annual Tingly Awards. Of course, everything we talked about is going to be linked in the show notes because I know y'all love a good rec, and everybody needs a bigger TBR as we go into 2025. Now, with 2025 in mind, we mentioned a reading challenge. Meg, this was your brainchild.
This was
so delightful. So tell the listeners What do we got for them this year?
All right, I had this idea when my kids came home at the end of last academic year with that sign that said like buy a bunch of, or the tracker from the local public library that said read this many books and you get a free pizza. And I was like, how come I don't get free pizzas anymore? And then I found out that there is a bookstore in Buffalo, New York, which is halfway between us, that does these bingo challenges. And if you finish them, then you get a free pizza. And I was like, I can't give people a free pizza, but we can do a reading challenge. So you and I put our heads together. We came up with 24 different ideas of the types of books and micro tropes and author profiles that we would like to read in the next year. And we will create a glorious designed bingo card for all of you to download. We'll put it into our stories so that way you can get access to it. We'll update you throughout the course of 2025 about which of these categories the books that we're recommending and reading fall into. Do you want to just like read every other one to go through what these are?
Absolutely. Let's hit them with it. Hit him with it. Go.
All right. I will go first and then you just read every other. Okay. Quirky best friend.
Neurodivergent character.
An unexpected shifter animal. So like not a wolf or a bear, but like a really weird one.
Waking up married.
A drunken karaoke scene and or a striptease.
An author's debut novel.
But daddy, I love him forbidden relationship.
Love that one. That was my contribution. First date gone horribly wrong.
A book with fairies.
A book that comes with its own Spotify playlist.
A book with queer or LGBTQIA characters.
A book that has a color-coded spreadsheet or checklist.
A book where my boring partner is secretly a spy and or there is a heist you can host.
Perfect. Dragons.
There be dragons. A book where they have sex in the kitchen and Nikki gets weirded out by it.
The I hate you kiss.
A book with murderous or vigilante main characters.
An overseas road trip.
A book with a Christmas tree farm.
Author of color or own voices writer.
A book that has a main character who is sweet in the streets but naughty in the sheets.
Oh, we love those. A curvy heroine.
A book with a rescue from a dangerous situation, and bonus star if you're shirtless or you get wet in the process.
Ooh, all sorts of wet. Non-binary or trans character is the final square.
That's our bingo card for the year. Those are the categories that we are going to be trying to check off and notice when they happen in the books that we're recommending over the course of this year. If you want to join us for our 2025 First Dates and Soulmates bingo challenge, head on over to our Instagram or our Substack. You can download it there. You can check our Instagram stories as we'll be checking it off throughout the year. And as always, follow us on those platforms, subscribe, rate, review. We would love to hear from you in the Substack comments. Those sometimes light up when we have a particularly controversial opinion on things.
We love it. All right. Well, thank you again. Welcome to 2025. And coming up next week, we're kicking off a month of what I'm calling main characters who just want to improve themselves. And we are kicking it off with one of Meg's selections, Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. We will see you next week. Bye!